Okay, so I'm also the Learning Experience Director, as I say, for the Accelerate program, which is focused on the learning journey that participants have as they come through this program. So I do a lot of work for the University of New South Wales, which is a sponsor for this program, and I develop and deliver digital transformation programs for the university. So I've developed a number of those, and Accelerate is just part of that journey. So I'm here to talk to you about your learning journey as you move forward, assuming you come along the journey with us, whether you dip in or you're there for the whole journey. If you've been on the Accelerate program, you already started that process and you will have seen some of the presentations we've given and the masterclasses we've given. As Sam put up, this is the learning journey we're going to go through, and you saw the documentary with Petro going through the 105 cameras and getting digitized. We'll start to think about the research and design of what the use case could be, what problems are we trying to resolve, what customer problems are we trying to resolve, building the use cases, applying them on different use cases, and then starting to the lessons learned. So as you go through that journey with us, assuming you're going to come along that journey, which I think is a really marvelous journey, by the way. I don't think there is any other opportunities out there for people to take a free journey through understanding a warts and all view of what it takes to put up one of these bleeding edge technology digital transformation initiatives. And so you could consider the project elements, which is a lot of what Amanda talked about. So what does it require in terms of the project work streams, the experience design, the digital and technological components of it? What I'm encouraging you to do is think about the broader aspects on your organization. And so as you think about the project journey at each of those steps, I'm also encouraging you to think about the organizational journey. So the impact on your organization of scaling this type of technology across your organization. And typically when we deal with clients, you get the real value is created when you start to scale this across your organization. And so thinking about those things that might help you or enable you is quite important. At Intergile, we have a number of frameworks that we use. We start with a digital ambition framework, which is think about whether you're optimizing, which is really focusing on your existing business, doing what you do today better, faster, quicker, enabled by technology, or whether you're innovating, which is creating new business models, new revenue streams, digitizing your assets, monetizing your data, and your maturity assessment. So how capable are the capabilities you've got in your organization to help you through that digital transformation? Those two things need to match. So does your ambition match your maturity? So that's the first thing we do. And as we start to look at the gaps, which is item step 2, we start to understand what are the things you need to fill. Where do you need to add capabilities into your organization? And then we start to look at the 7 levers you can pull in your organization to start to move the dial on digital transformation to become more digital. And that's what the digital canvas is about. So if you're interested in all of this stuff, there's a lot more of it in here. And as Sam said, there's a lot more of it on the social learning platform. So sign up there, there's videos of real life case studies of how people have used these different frameworks. Organizations have used these different frameworks. But for today, we want to focus in on the digital canvas, the digital transformation canvas. So I offer this to you as a means to think about the impact as you go through the digital human journey. Think about what it might mean to your business in the wider aspects of trying to scale this type of technology across your organization. So, thinking about a digital transformation canvas, there are 7 levers, as I say. They're up there. We'll go through these in a second and start to relate them to the digital human project. But for now, think of them as the core elements, the accelerators, and the enablers. And quite often we get stuck on the core elements because that's the sexy bit. That's the technology and the data and the customer problem. But actually the accelerators and enablers are what help you scale this across your organization. So we also need to consider those elements as well. There's a lot more detail that sits below this, and it is available in the pack. Is a series of questions. These are not prescriptive. These are just to get you to start think about the levers in your organization you might need to pull in order to transform. And so you're welcome to take this back to your organization and start thinking about it. But it's just a prompter, really, to start thinking about it. We're going to keep at this level, really, for this discussion today. And think about these 7 levers and how they might apply to digital humans. So the first thing is the core elements. So the core elements of the digital canvas are the 3 things that pretty much exist on any digital initiative. I'm not just talking about digital humans, I'm talking about any type of digital initiative. You typically have a customer or user problem, or if you're a government agency, a citizen, or it could be an employee problem. You're trying to create value. For me, digital transformation is about creating value, unlocking value through the application of technology and data. And so part of it is understanding what the problem you're trying to resolve is. And typically you'd start there. We're going through this learning journey in a way to give you some understanding of how to deploy a digital human. But you'd actually start with what's the problem you're trying to resolve, regardless of the technology. Then work out what technology would support that. And so understanding the customer and user centricity, you need to understand that bit. There's always an emerging technology, whether that's the SMAC stack, there's social mobile analytics cloud, or where it's kind of more disruptive like blockchain or IoT or edge computing or whatever it is. There's a technology component to what you're trying to do with digital. And then there's data information. So clever use of analytics and data to solve a customer problem using technology. Those are the core elements. Okay, that kind of makes sense. So when you apply that to a digital human, what does that mean? So I'm going to try and explain that in part using what Sam introduced you to, that lovely framework to start to think about this, which is in every digital human, there's a sensing, there's an understanding, and then there's a responding component. And when you start thinking about the core elements that sit below a digital human, then it might look a little bit like this. So there's a digital relationship you have with that 2 or 3D image, depending on how you want to consider it. And that is really about the computational element. It's having the brain the size of a planet to be able to consume all data, make sense of data, access data that might reside in your organization. So there's a digital element to the relationship you have with that, which is really focused on operational excellence, because it's about pulling data from the database, it's about translating that data and then putting it back out to a customer who might be interested in that data, but doing it in such a way that, so Reg mentioned the longitudinal elements of the surveys they do at Feedback Avatars. So you know what somebody said exactly 2 years ago when they answered the question. That's having a brain the size of a planet, right? But it's because of the accuracy, the analytics, the data, and the automation. So that's that side of it. Then you have the emotional connection. As we interact with other humans, as we interact with anything, we're looking for an emotional relationship with something. Things that you can relate to some people better than you can do with others, and that's because of empathy. It's because of the creativity and passion that somebody might have, the building of rapport between 2 individuals. And so there's the human relationship, and that's the domain of emotional connections. So the marketer's dream comes when those 2 things come together, which is really about customer intimacy. That's when you can bring the size of brain the size of a planet and really connect with somebody and put the 2 together to create tailored solutions, tailored answers. That's where customer intimacy comes in. And this is an evolving, emerging area, right? So the technology is evolving as we speak. There's new technologies coming out from all over the world that help with this. And customer intimacy is driven through a new branch of AI. Well, it's not that new actually, but Empathic AI, which is all about building empathy. And if you're not familiar with that, Google it. Has anybody heard of this before? Yep, a few, good. Not that many, but just a few. But Google it, have a look. And that's driven by sensor fusion, where you're bringing all the sensors together to be able to understand the individual. If you think about how we interpret body language and we interpret facial expressions, we've learned that over the years we've been alive, and we've figured out what that looks like. It's so hard for a computer to do that. And at the moment, you're relying on natural language processing, you're relying on some visual cues. But as technology increases, we'll be able to measure things without wearing wearables, like in health, application, you could have a wearable to understand your heart rate, etc. But there'll be a time when it'll be less intrusive than that, where you can sense people's changes in temperature, etc., and you can measure that. And that's when you bring all those sensors together to create that customer intimacy. And that kind of creates trust, because you really are relating to individuals and picking up on all of the sensors that we do as a normal human being, but potentially without the biases that we put into these play. Now, there's a good question about making sure we don't build biases into it, which comes back to leadership, which we'll talk about later. But if you think about that, and as that explores in 10 years' time where all this technology is going to be, that's where I think a lot of value will be in driving customer intimacy with this type of technology. So I wanted to expose that to you in terms of the core elements and how that relates to digital humans. And then there's the accelerators. So as I say, you can always get stuck in those shiny new technology stuff. But actually, when you start thinking about how do you put this into your organization, and more importantly, how do you get to speed to value? How do you increase the speed to get your return back? There are a few things you can do, and this applies to digital transformation as a whole as much as it does to digital humans. But think about your digital business model and the ecosystems. You need to think about who you partner with, what ecosystems you build around you to deliver this. You don't have to have all of those skills internally, but it's useful to have some of those skills built internally. So to prioritize what you build internally versus what you partner with organizations to do. Agile business and agile architectures are an important enabler, and Unique have a platform for digital humans. If you're thinking about analytics, a platform for data visualization across your organization. If you're thinking about mobile business, the platforms you might use to drive mobile applications and porting things into the cloud so they're accessible. These are the things from a technology standpoint that you need to consider around your technology architectures, but there are also elements around the way you work, agile teams. Digital humans in particular, and we'll talk about this in a second, require people from across the business to come together to make it really work. So how do you create that collaborative environment for people to work together and drive those agile processes, design thinking, etc. So that's part of what you need to think about in terms of accelerators. And in terms of digital humans, as I say, you're pulling stuff from across the organization. So how do you make sure that people can collaborate in a safe environment? Establishing technical capabilities internally in your organization, building partnerships with externals. Don't just rely on your organization internally. Decide which bits you need to build internally that you think is your core competency, and import the rest of it as you build. So those ecosystems and external partners are a component of what we need to think about. The agile business structures, I've covered that, so I won't. Amanda talked about integrating with your existing infrastructure. So think about platforms that help you do that, integrating with different systems that you have, like the HR systems, etc. Data latency is a big challenge for this, so you need to think about how do you get access to your data. Was it data ready? Was it conversation ready data? Yeah, conversation ready data somebody mentioned earlier. But having the inner space that can be used for that, and that's an interesting challenge that you have to deal with. Security and data privacy is another one. It applies to all types of digital transformation, but even more so, I think, to digital humans, because every interaction that an individual has with a digital human is being captured. That narrative is being used, and so the privacy elements of that, the security elements of keeping that needs to be thought about in terms of how you use that data and how it's captured. Sorry?
I noticed that ethics isn't on there. Is that part of your kind of paradigm, what you think about?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, in the next slide, we talk about leadership and culture, and I think it comes into that. But it's an important question I don't think people have the right answer to, and it's not being, and governments take a while to catch up on this, so it's not actually being legislated against at the moment. there's things like GDPR, etc., which covers, privacy, but it doesn't really cover ethics. And so it comes back to how are leaders in the organization thinking, right? About, exactly. So you don't chuck away your corporate values and your own personal values when you go into this. You need to bring them with you. And what do you say no to in terms of the types of applications you're prepared to use this against? And that comes into leadership, which is the next bit. So there's about 1.3 trillion that's being invested in digital transformation. It's heading to 2 trillion based on research from IDC. But only somewhere between 10 and 30% of that spend is seen as being delivering against the benefits. And when you look at what's not enabling those benefits, what's getting in the way, people like McKinsey and Gartner are talking about this stuff. This is the enablers, but they're also the barriers if you don't get them right. And so this is about things like fostering the right type of leadership in your organization, which covers the question that you just asked, which is how do you make sure that you're not putting biases in? Now, there's a technical bit to that, which is making sure that the data and the algorithms that you are using, that you're employing in this, is not building in biases. So there's a technical component to that. And then there's an ethical leadership component around making sure that it's done in the right way and that you're deploying that and you're using the right type of use cases that promulgate this type of technology in the right way. So, fostering digital leadership, fostering talent, that's an important element. Culture in a digital world. Culture is actually a little different in a digital world than it is in an analog world. And that doesn't mean that you have to chuck away everything that you do in an analog world and just absorb and develop a whole new culture. It means thinking about the things that you need to emphasize. So you need to have experimentation, but you need to have that not just give people free rein as to what they can do and what they can work on. You can do that, but you need to do it within a framework. So you need a disciplined framework for experimentation. How do you create that environment for that to really work in your organization? You need to have collaboration. We talked about that. It's an extension of your brand. So you need to bring people from different parts of your organization. But how do you make sure that you can collaborate with individual accountability? Right? You need to have, as I say, you need to be able to experiment. And so there's a number of things to think about in relation to the digital culture. You need to have a safe environment, but you need to be brutally honest in that safe environment. And that's an interesting thing to think about, those two dynamics coming together. And so when you think about that in relation to digital humans, the leadership style needs to be visionary, because it is breaking new ground. This is stuff that is emerging. It's on the bleeding edge. You also need to think about it operating in a world where you may not have a certain ROI. The certainty on ROI might be pretty minimal. So how do you make sure that you get the leadership style that's savvy enough with that risk to be able to take that on? There's the ethical dimension. We've talked about that, so I won't labor that, but it's about leadership. It's still evolving. There are no simple answers to that one, I don't think. Nurturing the right skills, learning from the digital natives of this world who are already past. They don't have to move from an analog world. They're already in a digital world. What are they doing in terms of how they operate? Are there lessons that you can learn from them to bring into your organization? Brand, as an extension, is cross-functional, so you have to bring people from across the organization. I think we talked about, is there a course for creating conversation? There isn't. Well, I might take that back to the uni. But for me, it's like a data artist, right? There's an art to it as much as a science to it. And so it's kind of bringing the world of science and the world of art together to create conversations that really spark and get to that customer intimacy, build rapport, etc. So nurturing the right talent and being risk savvy but encouraging experimentation, I've talked about that. So those are the things you might want to think about. So as you are thinking, if you come along the journey, and I hope you do, as you're thinking about how you're learning about the project and the initiative, also think about how this might relate back to my organization. And we now move back to the start of this. As I said, you would typically start with a customer problem. And that's part of the exercise we're going to do in the workshops. But it's also, the next session is all about introducing you to some techniques that help you think about what that customer problem might be.